actually at my house up at the University of the South at Sewanee, and I'm fortunate to live on 13,000 acres that the university owns. But when I'm working during the week, I work down at the Chattahoochee Nature Center. And as Lewis says, we like to just get people out in nature to connect them. And one of the tools that I've used myself professionally with my own Ph.D. work, working on the Georgia coast with sea turtles, is been using a kind of like a field journal. But when I started working with students at Woodward Academy many years ago, and also my biology students at Kennesaw State University with some of my colleagues, we wanted to bring back the old-fashioned journal that people would use in the past, way before people had photography. And so, you know, we would try to do things like this. So one of the things that you'll notice on my first page here is that, again, if you want to put it in the chat box, does anybody know whose journal this might be? Well, let me just share with you. This is Lewis and Clark's journal. So why would Lewis and Clark keep a journal? Well, when they left St. Louis, one of the big things that they had to do is map out the West and do some geological work. And then, you know, they did not bring in, you know, GoPro cameras, iPhones, iPads. And so they actually kept journals along the way. So this is one of the coolest things that I think is kind of neat. And I think you can do this yourself. I know a lot of you probably keep journals. And so I'm just going to kind of go through a few things right here and go through some exercises. And again, I might pause every once in a while to ask you guys some questions. So again, a couple of people I want to kind of thank before I get going is some of my colleagues, Joe Durenberger and Steve McCullum, who were retired, but we've been doing this type of work for almost maybe 20-something years, and this is part of our scholarship also. So I guess the big question is, why keep a journal? Now, here's an example of my journal right here that I keep, okay? And it's in this handout also that we're gonna come up here. And then I keep journals all the time. Here's another journal that I keep, that I've kept, as you can see that one. And again, I'm sure you all have kept journals in the past. Well, one of the biggest things that we do when we're working with students, and even for myself, I took a walk in the woods today. It's 27 degrees outside today, and I didn't bring my journal. But what I do is when I go out and take a walk in the woods, it helps me to kind of calm down a little bit, but it also increases my powers of observation when I'm out here in the woods. And again, I live on a piece of property at the university, similar to Berry College. So we have lots of walking trails, but even if you're down in your own backyard, you can do this. I have a couple of sitting spots at the Chattahoochee River, one by the boardwalk and one up in the forest. And we're lucky to have 127 acres, lots of parks around, you know, the metro Atlanta, and you might be in other parts of the state of Georgia. So we're blessed to have really great places to get out in nature. So one of the things it helps do is increase your observation. It improves your retention of experiences. Well, let me just tell you a story. Just take a break for a second here. My son actually walked the Appalachian Trail, at least 3/4 of it, when he graduated from high school back in 2007. And he started up in Maine. And one of the things I suggested he would do, because we grew up in Maine, and he was born in Maine, but so he graduated and he started up at Mount Katahdin. I suggested to him that he take a small journal, even smaller than this, and along the way to record some of his experiences. Well, I had an opportunity to get with him on the trail about 2 weeks into his journey, because he started north and started hiking south, and he was keeping a journal. And at the end, I asked him about his journal, and he did not do it. But he had a chance to do some travel around the world. He's taught with me in Costa Rica, spent some time in Colombia, and also taught English as a second language in China. And so one of the things he admitted a couple of years ago is that, oh, Dad, I've lost some of those experiences in my head. I didn't take many pictures when I was hiking the trail. I wish I had kept a journal. So again, it helps, retention of experiences, documents, observations for future references. I like to do the creativity aspect of it. Sometimes I will do some of my journals is maybe just doing leaves. I just go kind of bonkers, and I just kind of get really into it in the springtime, and to be creative. And I have a journal, like a tone journal right here, and it's all about the trees in my forest. And so I can add, leaves in here. I can add information in here. And what I'd like to do is continue this on and maybe do terminal buds, maybe do some tree bark rubbings and things like this. So again, it just helps me to work on that aspect. And then from academically, we would want the students to be able to synthesize their observations, to make connections, ask questions. One of the big things that I recommend that's really a good reference is at the end of this presentation is this document right here by John Muir Laws. And he talks about, a couple of different things when you're out there. And the questions are the following. I wonder what's going on. Like yesterday I was in the woods and I was wondering about all these frosty little tiny mini ice sculptures out there. So the closer I got, I was observing, and what they were, which was fantastic, is that they were like spider webs. And with all this frost, and it was down below freezing, it was just magical to be out here. And then, you might want to jot down, I noticed all these, all these things in the forest. I wonder how that happened, because right now I'm sitting up in the fog over here. And it reminds me of when I was a child, growing up in Rhode Island and Maine, and the first snow, or maybe when we had ice storms. So again, you put those types of things into your journals. Let me just continue on in terms of how do you get started. It's kind of like the mechanics, the basic mechanics of it, from scratch, if you've never done this before. One of the things that you got to do is just kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to nature journal on unless I'm working with students on St. Catherine's Island in the summertime from Swanee. And, we're working on maybe some beach, go on the beach and we bring back seashells and other things, maybe some plastics and some other things like that. And so sometimes we have a focus that way, but I'm just going to go out into the woods with my backpack and take my journal with me or go on a trip. I'm not sure what I want to kind of write on. So one of the things I do is to try to just kind of relax. I have a meditation practice. I do a little mindfulness. But what I do is I kind of like close my eyes and relax and then open up after 3 or 4 minutes. And then that way I can just figure out what I want. And then I just use all my senses, in terms of sight, sound, smell, touch, hearing. And then what I want to do next is figure out what I want to do and maybe record some and do some sketches and do some observations and reflect on some of my thoughts and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the mechanism. Now, a really cool book I highly recommend is David Haskell. It's in my bibliography, and we can send this to you guys later, or you can email me. He wrote a book called The Unseen Forest, and he studied for like over 10 years. That was his mandala, and he wrote about it. So he's a very prolific writer. He's got like his third book is coming out right there. So again, he would do some mindfulness and quietness, and then kind of like keep a journal out here in the forest here around Swanee. So what do you put in here? So here's some of the basic stuff that you need to put in your journal. Kind of like what you would do if you're going to go on a trip, do your trip journal. The date, location, temperature, weather conditions. Today it's foggy. I'm up on the fog. I live at 2,000 feet above sea level. It's very foggy up here, so it's very cloudy sometimes. Time of day. The other things I add sometimes is sunrise, sunset, phases of the moon. And then I just sometimes will put in there sketches, sound maps, poems, writings. So here's an example of what I just showed you right out of my journal, or what it might take a look at. And so over in the right-hand corner over here is all that type of data. And then the phase of the moon. And this was like about a 10-minute quick sketch. And then I just go back and add some watercolors. Sometimes I'll take my watercolors with me out in the field. I have these watercolor pens. And also watercolor kits. So I can just do that right there. I tend to use these permanent type pens right here, micro pens and all this other stuff. Again, a lot of this stuff is in my handout. One of the cool things I like to do is sometimes have students do a sound map. Particularly today, the sound was really traveling through the fog and the forest when I was taking a walk with my dog. And so I would come back, maybe come back later on when I do my afternoon journal and do a sound map. And so I can give you an example of what that looks like. Here's the details. I think I have an example on here. Yeah, and this journal right here, and this was a few years ago, but right over here in the corner, probably not the best image right here, but what you do is you put a circle, you put an X in the middle, and then what you do is close your eyes and just listen to the different sounds. Now, if you're a birder, you can pick up the sounds. Like today, I was hearing a tufted titmouse and a wren. And if you know those types of mnemonics, you can put that in there. But, you know, when I'm working with students, even elementary students that come to the Nature Center, or even adults when we do the Master Naturalist class at the Nature Center, one of the things we do is maybe do mnemonics. What does it sound like to you? So put those sounds like it's a chipping sound or a car alarm sound, or maybe it's a song, or maybe it's a bird song like a phoebe. So again, sound maps are kind of cool. Now, tips for sketching and drawing. Again, this handout will be available for you all. Things I want to emphasize is we don't want to work on doing pretty pictures. The idea is to capture as much as you can and spend time on, you know, just getting some details down. Observation drawing, this helps you just go through the whole process. I think it's kind of magic when you visually see it, start sketching it, and then putting it down on paper. Again, it helps for like focusing, your observational skills, retention. And again, to me right now, it's very relaxing, particularly what's been going on with COVID. Some of the stuff that you might want to use to start your journal, easy, is, copy paper, or some other paper that's similar to this, maybe from a sketchbook. I tend to like to use these types of books that are firm. There's lots of different types of books out there. You can go buy them all over the place, get them on sale. Work on that aspect. What else do I put in there? To get yourself going, all you really need to have is a number 2 pencil. Number 2 pencil is when you take some drawing classes, is right in the middle of the scale. It's an HB. So just a number 2 pencil, a firm back. It could be one of these journals I just mentioned. And then another thing that's kind of fun you can do if you can have students and yourself maybe make your own journal. This happens to be, and the information's right there. This is a beaver chew, a rubber band, some recycled cardboard, and some different type of paper that you can put inside your journal. Could be art paper. Well, sometimes this is an art sketch of a seashell that we have never seen on St. Catherine's Island. Here's a little bit of reflection, a little bit of writing in here. Here's some tree rubbings that are in this one. Here's a start of a kind of like a sound map going on here. So there's lots of, you can put the different types of paper in here too, which is kind of fun. So again, instructions to do that. All that stuff is really cool. Now, the coolest thing that I have found in an art store up in Maine many years ago is that these ninja type, watercolor pens here, they have the water vesicle in here, and it's kind of like a watercolor brush. You can take this with you, so you don't have to worry about bringing a water source or anything like that. So these are kind of cool to take out, and I'll show you how this works in a second. Now, one of the exercises that you can do, and if you have a piece of paper and a pencil, and if you're in your house right now or wherever you are, I just took this leaf from one of my house plants. I've taken this sheet of paper right here, broken it up into different squares. And one of the things that you can do is kind of like something that you can do to kind of get yourself ready to do some sketching. And I can demonstrate for you right here. Let me see if I can, you can't see, let's see here. Let's see if I can draw it down here. One of the things that you can do, this is probably not the best view, but I apologize for that, is what we call a blind contour drawing. So what you do is you take the object itself and you put the pencil down on the paper, and what you're doing is you're taking a look at the object off to the side. You can't see my face, but I'm staring at the object, and you go around and you kind of get the general outline of that object right there. And then the next thing could be a modified contour. And I do a lot of this in my field journals all the time, where you looking at it, starting off at a certain times, doing the overall sketch of it, and kind of like working on it. And this is kind of a skill that this takes time to work on. And then the other thing sometimes I do, which is kind of fun, you can see me doing this over here, is that you can take the leaf itself and just trace it around there, or do a diagram, or do a rubbing and stuff like that. Again, you want to do these types of exercises to work on your drawing skills. Again, one of the really cool books that I highly recommend if you've never taken any sketching and drawing is Betty Edwards' book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And again, a lot of these books I'm mentioning are in the bibliography section of my of the handout that I can send to you, or these folks can send it to you. So the idea is to, you don't have to be everybody can learn how to draw. We're not, the idea is not to draw pretty pictures. I am an artist. I do take watercolor classes. I do bird, renderings right here. Here's one of my birds that I did this year, a ruby-crowned kinglet. Here's another bird that I do sometimes. Well, again, we're not trying to go in that direction. We want to do sketches. And so sketches are very, similar to what I did today over here. It's let me see if I can get a little bit darker for you. It's kind of like you want to get the general idea and shape of it. And again, sometimes it's okay to take the object, if you can, if it's big enough, and just trace it. And what you're trying to do is get different characteristics of it. So I traced this one over here, and then you can work on later on to finish drawing and everything else, add more detail. Now, let me just continue on here for a second. I know I'm used to doing this in person. I really appreciate you guys' patience and then coming in today, and hearing me. So thanks. Let me just continue for a little bit. Here's some examples of what you can do. A lot of these sketches are from my colleague, Joe Durenberger, who again used to teach invertebrate zoology and oceanography with me, and also some other courses at Kennesaw State University. So here's some examples of what you can do. Do a little scribbling. And if you look over here to the side, this is kind of like what we're talking about. This black dome. It's got some other details. Again, the contours. And then later on, you want to put the veins in here and some other characteristics of it. Maybe, this leaves are alternating, they're waxy and they're thick. So any other types of observations that you put down there. The other thing I encourage people to do is, I don't know it all. I sure as heck don't. My specialty is with sea turtles. But then, the last 14 years I've been teaching and working over at the Nature Center. And it's not a day that doesn't go by that something's really kind of cool that I see in the woods and I don't know the answers. And so what it just helps my curiosity, the sense of wonder that Rachel Carson would talk about, It keeps my mind open, and I just ask questions all the time. And I think that's what good science is all about, is observations, and you can contribute to that. One of the cool things, not to get off subject here, is you can use your iPhone and do things with, iNaturalist, and you can contribute. And if you don't know what the plant is, you can take a snap of that. But again, I like the old-fashioned way of maybe taking some leaves from maybe a tree and learning a little bit about it, and then go into a field guide and take a look at that, and then do the measurements. So, and your field journals, some of the things you want to do too is to do some measurements. So you want to put numbers in there. You want to put lengths of it in there, duration. Particularly when we're working on the coast, I have students working with me. We're doing trawls, and we're going in the estuaries, and we're taking some detail. And so here's an example of some of my students' journal pages. That's one. So here's, again, I know this is, here's some stuff that you can see what they did in terms of on the beach. And then we did a transect on the salt marsh. And here's some of the data that we did. We did a 100-meter transect, and every 10 meters we did a meter by meter quadrant, and we're trying to figure out the cover of the stuff. So we can use lots of different details. Again, it depends on how you want to keep this journal and what you want to use it for. Just again, I like the ideas of just kind of like using it the way you want to use it. So here's some other ideas. Outlines of organisms, maybe certain parts of the organism. I know a lot of birders, take a look at the different field marks. Same thing with seashells, some type of diagrams, this habitat, topography. Be creative. Let's let it go. Again, lots of different ways that you can add to your field journals. We do an awful lot of this, profiles, maybe down at the beach, what things look like. Maybe I can show you. Here's an example. It's not the darkest, but here's some stuff that we did. We did it down on St. Catherine's Island. We're doing seashells, and we're doing a little bit more detail with that. All right. Not just the sketching and art part. Lots of ideas to put in your journal. I like to ask a lot of questions. You want to put a lot of language in there, and generally speaking, use reflective type generative activities that are in science. So we just want to add a lot of questions in there. It's kind of like being a detective. It's the who, what, where, what's going on, that type of information. I know I'm going through this very quickly, and at the end of my handout is a lot of references. So I went through that very quickly. I think I'm done with this type of presentation. Just kind of like the preliminary stuff. I know this is very quick. So Louis, I'm going to take this off share and let participants ask me any questions, or if they've been doing this themselves, I'd love to hear what they've been doing.
Well, Tom, we do have one question in the chat, and it is, what is your favorite thing to draw?
My favorite thing to draw, I actually love to draw birds. And if you're on Instagram, I highly recommend that you follow this guy named Kevin Gaston. Kevin Gaston is a local photographer in the metro area. He's got some really fantastic birds. And this bird right here is actually a representation of one of his photographs. The other thing that I love to paint is trout and fish. I do a lot of trout and fish. So anyways, draw whatever moves you. That's a good question.
And here's one from me. Do you have a favorite spot in Georgia to do
I have
journaling?
a favorite spot in Georgia? Oh gosh, Georgia is so unique. It's kind of like Maine. You got the mountains to the coast. We're lucky to have, really cool mountains. We have great ecoregions. I have a sitting spot on the Chattahoochee River. I just love it down there by the river. And then when I'm down on the coast, I've had an opportunity to work on all those islands. I just love St. Catherine's Islands. Cumberland Islands is really a kind of a very special place in my heart because I did a lot of my field work there. And one of the coolest places that I encourage people to get out and check out is the Okefenokee Swamp. It's just incredible. It's just awesome. And go there at any time of the year. And it's just a wicked thing. Here I am saying main stuff, wicked thing. And it's just so cool down there. Yeah. Those are my favorite spots. How about you, Lewis?
Well, I haven't tried it before, but I'd love to check that place out.
Okay. Any comments or questions? I know I went by this very quickly, and I like to do this in person and not work off a handout. So if you send me an email and tell me that you're in this presentation, I will send you a copy of this and some other resources are available. Okay?
Okay, got a question. What is Kevin's last name?
Oh, Kevin Gaston, Gaston. Gaston. He is incredible to follow on Instagram.
So we got another question from Liam. Would you ever recommend making a final journal from draft journal entries?
Yeah, a friend of mine, Steve McCullum, who does a lot of traveling, he spent three years in the Peace Corps down in Peru. He likes to have these small little pocket journals that he just takes notes in and field journals type stuff. And then he brings it into another journal and it adds more details. And I do that too. I'm an artist sometimes. So I might do, when I'm out in the field, I might do quick sketches, maybe use my iPhone to capture some of those images. What we do in art, like a preliminary art, is that we do value sketches. And then I take it back to the studio and then do a finished product. Yeah. So there's lots of different ways you can use that. Good question.
So you described the process as sort of investigation. Have you ever found anything that was particularly surprising during your journaling?
Yeah, what's surprising, like I said, is this seashell right here. It's from one of my journals right here. It's called a pear whelk, and we have these. We have this collection on St. Catherine's Island where we've been working there for like 25 years, and a lot of these, and even further on than that, it's kind of like a herbarium collection. This seashell had never been found on St. Catherine's Beach. Now, questions I have in my head is, how did it get there? Did someone, was it in a boat and dropped it off? Or is this a new kind of species that it's in that area? So again, we don't know, but it's kind of like citizen science or community science. You never know how much you can contribute to the science. And if you keep a journal, and birds do this all the time. We do this with Christmas bird counts. And I think coming up real quick is the backyard bird count through the Cornell University ornithology. So you can contribute to that. So I think you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to have a PhD like me and with marine, with sea turtles. You can help kind of like be part of the science. I believe anybody can be a scientist. You just need to be out there and capture all that stuff and contribute to to what's going on out there. Science is incredible, changing all the time. And we're seeing cool stuff all the time. Like yesterday when I saw all the spider webs with all that ice, I was thinking, how cool is that? I've never seen that. And I spent a lot of time in the woods up here. I think that's why science is just so awesome, man.
All right, we got another question from Nadia. Do you use colored pencils or paint for your journal, or rely on pencils and pens?
I do a lot of watercolors. You can use pencils. I use permanent ink. I've used lots of different mediums. It could be acrylics. It could be gouache. It could be sometimes I use tea. I like to use tea out of my own teacup. Sometimes I'll take in walnuts and kind of get the walnut ink out of that. and kind of, sometimes I use soil, that Georgia red soil. If you can use that, can you use it like gum? You can add a little adhesive. I just use anything I can get my hands on to kind of, add to the nature journal. So that's kind of cool. That's a really cool question. Yeah.
So you mentioned those watercolor pens. Did you particularly like using those?
Oh yeah, I love them. These things are great. They're on different sizes and everything else. And again, it's in my handout, but these are like one's kind of wide, and then I have another one that's kind of like fine tip. And these are great because you can put them in your backpack or your fanny pack. Get a little watercolor kit. Take a small little journal. Take some pencils. Some of these pens over here, and you're ready to rock and roll. So yeah, I think it's fun.
Hey, Lewis, can I ask a question?
Ahead.
I'm sorry. Your guest said that when he started journaling, he actually became more observant. Why does that happen? I think that's really interesting.
Well, what do you think? I'm gonna reflect it back at you. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think when you look more, you see more. And then when you look more, I know about, like you make a search image and then you start seeing things more. Do you think that's one of the reasons why you see more?
Yeah, I think we're in a very fast moving,
Yeah.
we don't tend to slow down, and that's why I like to do meditation in the morning to slow down. And the whole thing about when David Haskell was writing his book about the unseen forest, he slowed down, did a little centering, and it's kind of like our native people that were probably on the land way before we were. When they were tracking animals, they have to slow down.
Yeah.
Become the animal. Just kind of like just be aware of what's going on. Like today, today I was walking in the fog. So I had to rely on my senses, my ears, and the birds, the sounds were just so there. So I think when we start to slow down, close our eyes, try to empty your head a little bit, you'll see a lot more, you'll hear a lot more, you'll be aware a lot more. Again, it's this whole thing about being mindful of what's out there in the environment. Mindful. I'm all about that.
No, I do sensory ecology of aquatic crustaceans who don't have eyes. So I often think about how to perceive the world without eyes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, because I know I had a colleague of mine many, many, many years ago when I was teaching up in Maine. She was blind and she had a Ph.D. in ecology, so she could pick up a seashell and tell you exactly what it was. Pretty awesome,
Oh yeah, feel it.
You can feel it. You can use your other senses.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a really famous blind malacologist, one who studies seashells.
Yes,
I forget
ma'am.
his name, but you know him? Yeah, I forgot who it was.
I don't. Cool stuff. Thanks for asking the question and contributing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I want to be cognizant of your time. And again, I want to thank Lewis for co-founding, that organization, and Brandy inviting me to be on this. You guys rock. I think science is important. I think we can all be scientists. We can all contribute to scientists. I think we're born scientists. One of the coolest books I read all the time is by Rachel Carson, A Sense of Wonder. I have that sense of wonder. I'm going to turn 67 here in a couple of days, and I'm still that little kid who was growing up on the Rhode Island coast in that salt marsh, picking up stuff and saying, "Oh man, this is so cool. I wonder what this is." So I encourage you guys to go out in nature, slow down, be safe, get a sitting spot, get a journal, and just have fun. Even if it's just for yourself. Thank you, Lewis, and thank you, Brandy, for allowing me to share my passion today.
Yeah, happy almost birthday, Tom. And I've just got one more question for you.
Sure.
In the vein of citizen science, do you know any programs or any communities organized around journaling?
Yeah, I mean, I highly encourage you to later on down in my handout in California and all over the United States, John Muir Laws, and they have this nature journal clubs. And if you're on Facebook, you know, there's lots of different places like that. Look at nature journal clubs. And, you know, my master naturalist class, when we meet once a month, we share our journals and stuff like that. So yeah, I encourage you to kind of like maybe start your own, and maybe also you might find out some information through the Children's Nature Network, the Children's Nature Network, where they're trying to do, you know, local clubs to get students and families outside. So you could do this. Yeah. John Muir Laws is a great reference. Good question. Thanks.
Tom, any last words? No, just go out and enjoy nature. I think nature is its best teacher, and nature is very therapeutic right now. I think it's, I've taken a lot of walks during COVID, and it's really helped my head and my heart. So thanks again for what you guys are doing.